Welcome down to my 9-foot homemade oak bar. Pour yourself a cold one. You are listening to Bucs in the Basement. My name's Chris, and Craig here is the biggest Pirates fan you'll ever meet. Let's talk Pirates baseball now. Welcome to Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Another day, not another week. It's not a week like any other. Your Pirates are 16-7, and as of we're recording now on Monday, 4/24, this won't be to your ears until Wednesday, so we'll see how the Dodgers series starts out. But your Buccos are in first place, and I wanted to bring back somebody who I had talked to before things were really getting going and we didn't know what to expect from the season. I'm bringing back Rob Biertempfel from The Athletic, Pirates beat reporter. Rob, how you doing today, brother?
I am busier than I expected to be.
That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Yeah, so I mean, there's just been a lot going on with the record, but I want to get to some news that broke over the weekend that I wouldn't say was shocking to us, but just when it came out, and that is the Derek Shelton extension and kind of the timing of it. I know that Ben Cherington said that, you know, this is something they had been talking about since spring training. But just like, it kind of seems, it's just like people are like, oh, of course they'll extend him now. The team's winning.
Yeah, well, you're right. It wasn't really shocking. It's something I'd heard about, you know, that would be a possibility at least, you know, over the winter. I mean, it was already coming out of last season, talking to some people. I'd gotten indications that Shelton was very much not on the hot seat, that the front office was very happy with the way things were going, even if the record didn't immediately show that, and that, you know, he would be given a longer period of time that's, you know, to be determined or to be announced, I guess, how long he got exactly. But he would be given more time to show what he can do with this group of players and the kind of the guys in the system. So when it started in spring training, and, you know, they had some other contract talks they were dealing with during spring training that maybe weren't quite as fruitful. And Ben alluded to that in his presser, where he said, you know, you got a lot of things going on, and it takes you a little time to cross the T's and dot the I's and all that. But the deal was done about a week or so ago, and you're right, this was they insisted it was purely coincidental that they announced it now, but you figure this is the perfect time. I mean, the club is very much on an upswing. Folks are very happy. People are buzzing about the Pirates, not just in Pittsburgh, but all over the industry. So, you know, what better way to kind of put another little cherry on the way things are going than to announce that Derek Shelton is going to be here at least for a little while longer. I think, you know, I've heard it's not necessarily what you might consider a long-term deal. It might just basically be a year to take the lame duck status off of him and to further reassess. You could speculate maybe that's something to line up his contract with the general manager's contract. A lot of teams do that. They put those two things kind of in tandem to make it easier to assess management if you're assessing all of upper management. So maybe Ben has already gotten an extra year, and you know, there was a year thrown on top for Derek as well. And you got to figure what these guys had to deal with since the start of their tenure here. I mean, they came in after the season from hell in 2019 and took a team on that was just fractured from top to bottom. And then you throw the pandemic on top of it, and then a couple 100 lost seasons, and it's a little difficult to gauge what Shelton can do, because he hasn't really had a normal season with normal players, a normal roster. This is probably the first one. So, we'll see where it goes from here. But I think it was a move that, it is good for the organization. There's some stability there. It's important, I think, because Shelton's kind of the guy. He's not just the manager of the everyday lineup and the bullpen and the rotation, but he kind of sets a tone that dives deep into the organization. He's on the phone with the coaches and the player development staff all over the system, every day of the week, monitoring things and kind of, helping to set the system of how they develop guys, how they train them, what the tendencies are offensively, pitching wise. So it's a big role. It's an important role. I think in a lot of ways it's a much, much bigger role than it used to be, back in the day in the 70s or whatever. That there's a lot more responsibility with it now, and keeping some stability at the top just at a time when things appear to be turning around, it's good to do.
Yeah, and it's different from the days when you were just the field general or the field manager. But when people were talking about the timing of this, I basically went out and said, this is a lot different than the John Russell extension, and anybody that's been around for long enough knows that was, they picked up his option, during the winter, and then basically chose, I think it was like the middle of June, to say, oh yeah, we picked up his year, and then by the end of that year, he's gone. So this is not, that type of thing. They announced it, like you said, only about a week after it was signed.
Yeah. This the Pirates are still secretive because they won't, get into details, but they're a little bit more, I guess you could say, forthcoming. Maybe that might be a term for it, but it's again a good move, not an unexpected move at all. I read about it a couple of times over the off season, but I thought this would happen, and here we are.
Yeah, I think it was part of your predictions there, was that he would get extended at some point in time, that we talked about before. But the other thing I wanted to get to, something very cool that happened, the Pirates Hall of Fame class for 2023 announced. The inaugural class was last year. It was a great event, and so I thought that there was going to be maybe 5 or 6 guys I didn't know, but the class of Elroy Face, Bob Friend, Dick Groat, and Kenta Colby, man, that is just a great Hall of Fame class, isn't it?
Yeah, 4 very deserving guys, for sure. And it was funny because that day, I was working on the story, and I hung up the phone and told my wife, if you would have told 14-year-old me that one day I'd be able to pick up the phone and just shoot the shit with Kenta Colby for an hour and a half, 14-year-old me would have passed out unconscious, because I was, that was kind of cool. So it was neat to be able to. I talked to Roy and to Teak that day, and just to get the perspectives from both of those guys, because obviously maybe not so much Face, but definitely Jacoby is my era of fandom, growing up here in Pittsburgh, and to see those guys get some kudos. Elroy helped define the role of the closer. I mean, he was a trailblazer, and he's one of the reasons the save rule was created in the first place. And and Teak, somebody I think tweeted at me that he just he looked like your 5th grade biology teacher or your insurance salesman, something like that. I mean, it really did. It was just this skinny, unassuming guy, but he threw a bazillion innings, and including that one that counted to get the last out in '79. So, but yeah, just a great class. A good chance to really look back on some of the great ones. I'm curious to see, how it's. I mean, because eventually Barry Bonds is going in. It's going to have to happen, and I think deservedly so, because I think during his time in Pittsburgh, he was maybe the second or third, depends how you want to put, like him and Clemente and Stargell in 1, 2, 3. But for players I saw live, he was definitely in that top 3. And whatever happened after that, when he, that's a whole different story. But he definitely belongs in the Pirates Hall, and I'm curious to see how the Pirates eventually handle that. If they turn, the whole event over to just him, or if he's part of a 4 or 5 man class going in, or how that's going to work. But yes, there's still a lot of great players out there to be inducted over the next, several years. But they're off to a pretty good start these past 2.
Yeah, and seeing, Bob Friend's widow, clutching just like a tissue, and how much it meant to her, and how much it meant to, to Steve Blass to like walk into their homes, and the joy in his face to, present that stuff to them was just absolutely amazing. And I think that fans, they're kind of like looking, okay, like you said, with Kent Colby, that's a guy, I mean, I remember him pitching, but not like very well. And, people, my age, I'm not that much younger than you, Rob. I mean, but, trying to see when those people are going to come in. The one that kind of surprised me, and I just kind of have to put it out there, and you don't have to comment on it if you don't want, is I thought Manny was going to get in this year. From the man that has sat out at the barbecue stand for the past 22 years, back to the, 3-time All-Star, and, I guess it would be the picture of him and Blass after, winning the World Series, Blass jumping in the air. And then also, back to him, strapping on a scuba tank and searching for his friend. That's one where I thought this was going to be Manny's year. And that's the only one, it's a great class, all deserving, but man, get Manny in next year. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I could see a class, if they want to make it a little bit of a theme next year, you take Manny and maybe Tony Pena. There's another great catcher from the past year. You have a couple of catchers, and maybe you go for, a couple of other, maybe a couple other pitchers, or you had 3 pitchers this year. Maybe you go for a couple other position players next year. This balance. I don't know, but I agree with you. I think it's these guys aren't getting any younger. And every year, when they have those reunions for the '79 team and whatnot, the group gets a little smaller. So you'd like to see these guys honored, get the recognition, while they're still alive and here to enjoy it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of even other announcers too as well. You got Gunnar, you got, Lanny Fratteri. That's the thing is when you have as rich of a history as the Pirates do, I mean, going down to like a Hall of Fame class, it has to be extremely difficult for everybody that's involved in those conversations.
Yeah, that's why if I had done it, and I think I wrote a column on this a couple of years ago, but I would have started with a class at 21, which just seems like a good number to start with, and and bring in a big class right away, and then you have time and ability, if you want to go to smaller classes, to honor guys who are older and infirm and whatnot. But I think the Milwaukee Brewers, when they had their inaugural class, it was something like 48 players or something. Geez. It was a huge group. And again, most of them, had already died. But, it was a big group and kind of an establishing thing. So, and you wonder too how the Pirates are going to do it. They have that wall at PNC with plaques on it, but, there's a lot of room. it's gonna happen quick because you got 100 and however many years of this organization, 130 odd years of baseball here. There's a lot of guys.
Yeah, definitely a lot of guys, and we gotta move forward to what's going on with these Pittsburgh Pirates of now, honoring the past, but also looking towards the future. The one player when Chris and I had talked last week, I said, I want to look to see where Ke'Bryan Hayes is at this point, next week. And at this point, I mean, since Cruz has been out, since he's been moved to the leadoff spot, he's slugging like 856. I think it's like a 128 WRC plus. Always making hard contact with the ball. Hitting it to all fields, which is something that, people were thinking he was working on more. When I was out in St. Louis, I did get to see the absolute, blast that he put out and he pulled. But are you noticing anything different with Ke'Bryan over these past couple weeks?
Yeah, it seems kind of, fundamental, but I think Shelton might have even mentioned it yesterday or the day before that, but he just seems to be on time. There were periods where especially last season or two, whether it was because of injuries or just being in and out of the lineup in the first place or whatever, he just didn't. He was never quite in sync. Or, and it took him a little while, and then something would happen. He would tweak his back or, the wrist again or whatever, and he would lose that. This year, he really has seemed, even in spring training, was making good, was barreling up a lot of balls. And I think, didn't he lead the team in home runs during spring training?
If he didn't, it was close. I mean, he was hitting the ball pretty well.
Right up there. So, it's just one of those things. Once you get that knack, you can ride it. A long way. Sometimes, you fall off it a little bit. I think we've seen that with Reynolds early on. Everything he was hitting was just stung. Ever since Cruz went down, not so much. I don't know if that's probably just coincidental, but, it just seems like maybe the past couple of games he's kind of been back a little bit. But there was a stretch of, a week or two there where it just wasn't quite as dominant. That's just, people mention all the time, and it just kind of gets passed off as cliche, but it really is important just to be comfortable in there, to be able to see the ball, and then just to have your timing down with when you begin your swing and the mechanics of it. When it's on, it's a beautiful thing, and I think we're seeing a lot of that right now with Brian.
Yeah, and with Brian, he did have back-to-back doubles after going. I think it was like 0 for 12 hitless-wise. I mean, he was driving some balls. He was, getting, I think it was like some sac flies and different stuff. But, and he's on the bereavement list. So, obviously thoughts and prayers to Brian and his family. And he's supposed to be back here pretty soon. So we'll see if, he's back at it and back on it again. But there are some guys that haven't been on it most of the time they've been here in Pittsburgh. So I hate to talk about negative stuff when we're doing so well, but is there like anyone that you could see in danger of being sent down to AAA? And then maybe who possibly could come up to replace them?
Well, when you look at the team, I mean, it's not even. I guess you need the areas you need to get better is the front end of the bullpen. And I talked a little bit with Chase DeYoung yesterday, and he was packing his bag to head to Indianapolis to begin a rehab assignment. And he was like, he says, I know I've sucked. I'm not going to, I'm aware of it. It's been a bad start to the season for me. And this really is more so than the health thing, or maybe, he just needs to go down there and get his head right and kind of get established so he can kind of maybe, hang on to his gig up here in Pittsburgh. Kanan Smith and Jigba has been put in a lot of time in the indoor cage before games, hasn't been playing a ton lately. And, it's kind of hard to get that hitting going whenever you're, in and out of the lineup or coming off the bench more often than not. You could just, he tell him, look at his face. He's working at it, but he knows he needs, he can't hit, what does he hit, like a $167 or whatever. You can't do that and stay in Pittsburgh. They'll find some other way around it. When Swaggerty comes off the injured list, or maybe he's already off, I think he was redshirted a bit, so he's probably close to coming off after the illness. And Miguel Andujar has been hitting a ton down in Indy. And, here's a guy that, lots of big league experience, and they got him for a reason, and they like him, and they hang on to him instead of just cutting him loose. They got him to Indy where they can, get him going and maybe do something there. So I would think those are a couple of guys who are eyeing, potential trips up to Pittsburgh. I'm curious to see how they handle the whole Drew Maggi thing. If we walk into the clubhouse on Tuesday and Drew's locker is cleaned out or not. It would be neat. I'm kind of rooting for him to stay, even if it's for just a few other days, just so we can get that big league back, I mean, I talked to him after the game yesterday, and I said, does it kind of put a little, shadow on the whole week, on the whole day of just coming up and everything, and then not being able to play in the game again. And he's like, no, it's just, I'm just a piece of what's going on here, and I just want to help the team win. And he said all the right things, but you got to know in his heart, he wants to step on the field, when the game's in play, and get his name on Baseball Ref.
Yeah, absolutely.
For having a bat or whatever. So there's some things that I there's some tweaking they can do to this team. I'm sure there's some things they're looking at, and this will be an interesting few weeks because the competition, they're finally going to face some teams with winning records. They're finally going to face a team with a winning record. The Dodgers will be tough. The Nationals, well, there's a little bit of a breather, but then they go to Tampa, which started the season. What they start at, like 92-0.
Yeah.
And then they come back, and the Blue Jays are here, and even the Orioles, a team that they're kind of similar to in some ways. They go to Baltimore in a couple of weeks. So some interesting challenges for sure throughout May. And I think if we're going to start to see maybe some better indications of whether this can continue or not, whether it has some staying power, it's going to come over the next 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, to see, Drew Maggi, I thought he was going to go in to play the field there in the bottom of the ninth on Sunday. I think he took off like his jacket or something, and I was like, oh man, he's going to get to go in the field, and to see his family. I think they like flew overnight from Arizona or something. So yeah, I mean, definitely rooting to actually see him playing a game. If you ever see me out and about in Pittsburgh, you will always recognize me, and not just because of the white beard, but also because of the Y that is always on top of my head, the hat I always wear. The Yins brand, proud partners with Bucs in the Basement. 3 dynasties, 1 brand, Yins. Finally, 1 brand to rep all black and gold. Follow @ShopYins for new merch drops and giveaways. Order online at www.shopyins, the emphasis on the 2 Z's, high quality comfort, lightweight materials, a new modern look for the black and gold, made for Yins, by a Yinzer. You gave me a good segue there, Robin. You may not have even known it, is that, in one of your latest mailbags, you mentioned the Orioles, and everybody was comparing. Not everybody, but there's a lot of people comparing, could the Pirates do, and jump ahead the way the Orioles did last season? But somebody asked you in a mailbag, how, Ben Cherington would approach the trade deadline if, he was in a similar position, because the Orioles traded off their closer and they traded off the clubhouse guy and Trey Mancini, and then obviously I just started thinking, I'm like, we've got Santana on a 1-year deal, we've got Vince Velasquez on a. I'm starting to think of all this stuff, and it's like, I don't know how the Pirates are going to approach this.
Well, there's so many variables. Sitting here at the end of April, heck, even a month from now, it's going to be looking through a glass darkly, trying to figure out what Ben may or may not do. And it depends, where are they, as they get closer to the deadline, how far back or ahead are they? What's available on the market or what's not? What's the demand like for the guys that they might be offering? Do they approach any of those guys about an extension? What happens with Brian Reynolds? Is he still, status quo contract-wise and going into year 3 of arbitration, or has he been extended? Has there been a breakthrough there? It's what kind of money would ownership be willing to commit to this endeavor? Does he have? Has he spent his budget for the year now, and that's that? I mean, under Neil Huntington, that was kind of the way it worked. That Neil had his budget, and sometimes he wouldn't make a lot of moves in the winter, trying to hedging and put a few dollars aside for a rainy day in July, or maybe a sunny day in July, I guess, when he hit the deadline, and he would spend it then. Would Bob Nutting be willing to cough up reach a little deeper into his pocket now and come up with something. Just so many variables there, so mmany uncertainties at this point that I don't even know if Ben Cherington can say for sure what he might do in July, because there's just so many things have to line up between now and then.
Yeah, and if there's players, we were talking about AAA, if there's players, ready to come up, I mean, with a Carlos Santana at first base, I mean, you have, Mason Martin down in Altoona, who's been talked about for a few years, Malcolm Nunez, but I mean, are those guys performing? Is Carlos Santana still performing? Is Vince Velasquez still performing? Would they even be tradable, at that point in time? But I know that that's what people are thinking because, you see Carlos Santana like leading the little dance shuffle huddle at the end of the thing. And it's like, well, what kind of effect would that have on the clubhouse if he was gone? But I mean, these guys are all professionals. They understand like what kind of contract he's under. And if he would have the opportunity to say, go to a contender and possibly win a World Series, you'd kind of have to be happy for him in that right too. I mean, I know Trey Mancini didn't perform well, but Trey Mancini's got a ring now. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Hey, what do you do if you're Ben Cherington and say, like the Philadelphia Phillies, just to pull a name out, come to you at the deadline, and maybe you're, in the middle of the pack now in the Central. Things have settled a little bit, and the Phillies need a piece or two to make a push. They need somebody, to maybe split some time. Maybe the Phillies are a bad example because Harper's going to be the DH. Maybe there's a club out there with a real chance to win the title, and they need a DH. And they need a guy that can give them a little bit of pop, that maybe play a little outfield from time to time. And if you're in the middle of the pack with the Pirates, does Ben Cherington trade Andrew McCutchen?
Oh, God, Rob, my heart just dropped, dude. You can't do this to me. You threw it in. But everybody's thinking about it because I know that, like, I've spoken with a bunch of people. I've spoken with you, spoken with Mackey, Alex Stumpf, all those guys. And it was like, well, man, it would have to be if Andrew said, like, hey, I know this might not be the year and I'll come back next year, but can you let me go win a championship? They want the team act, but they also want that personal thing of everybody. You play to win a championship. Any guy that's out there that says they're not, in it to win a World Series, they got to be like talking out both sides of their mouth or something because you want to win.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So it's a sticky, situation that, if you believe, if you're Ben Cherington and you really don't believe, you just look at the team, and even if you're maybe a couple of games up, you say, I just don't know if we can sustain. I don't know if we could get this team into the World Series. And you have an opportunity to send Andrew McCutchen to a team with a legit chance to win the World Series, for him to get that ring that he's never gotten in his career. What do you do? And it's hard, and that's why you got to look at just what's good for the team this year. But maybe you also consider what's good for Andrew. Maybe you consider, if we get something legit here, a real piece that we could use moving forward. That could, in a sense, kind of be Andrew McCutchen's legacy. That at first he brought Brian Reynolds, and then he brought Player X, who helped the Pirates, get over the top in 2025. So it's a fascinating question, and again, who knows where it goes? That's kind of the fun, for me, that's the fun thing of this season, the way it's shaping up. That it's not going to be just another, I don't think, slog to 100 losses, because there's times you think about, just jumping out of your car and the Clemente Bridge is closed now. But if it was
Rachel
open,
Carson,
jump out of the car, but now you have new variables and new and fascinating storylines that we didn't have to think about because we couldn't think about them before. And it's in that sense, we're already a month in. We're already 21 games, 22 games in, but it's been a lot more interesting covering and watching this club than it has been probably since the great debacle in 2019.
Yeah, and that was going to be my last question to you, Rob. But I got to end on a positive note here. Not that wasn't positive and wasn't great information, but I was just kind of thinking. I mean, the Pirates are 16-7 right now, which is a pretty pleasant surprise. Who or what would you say is like maybe one of the other big surprises to you so far during the 2023 season?
I'm a little surprised by Vince Velasquez. Much better than I expected. I mean, I expected some consistency there. I figured he'd be a workhorse. But the strikeouts, I didn't like. What did he strike out yesterday? 10.
Yeah.
It just tore through. It was the Reds, okay, but he tore through that lineup, pretty well. And that's 2 or 3 starts in a row now after a rough start. I mean, I remember, at the beginning, both he and Rich Hill kind of like lumbered through their first couple of starts, and people were like, let's bring up anybody in the world to pitch,
yeah.
Other than these guys. But now you're starting to see just the value of having those guys, because they've been able to rate themselves and kind of get in a rhythm quickly to help keep this rally that the Pirates are on going. So that for me has been a very pleasant surprise. I've been interested watching Austin Hedges. I spent a lot of time watching him these past few days. Not just for what he does, obviously not for what he does at the plate, but I mean, the stuff he does behind the plate and the stuff that I've seen, the stuff that he does. Well, for me, like the other day when he walked up to the plate and realized that Bednar was still warming up, and the first, 2 batters of the inning had made outs on a total of what I think was 3 pitches. So he kind of like slow-footed it up to the plate and then called time and then worked like a 6 or 7 pitch in at bat just to kind of extend it. Nobody's thinking he's going to hit a solo homer there or triple or maybe start a little mini rally, but you just need him to take some pitches and extend the at bat and make sure that Bednar is 100% loose out in the bullpen. And that's exactly what he did, and I can tell. I mean, he looked right out to the bullpen as he's walking up, and I thought, boy, that's what he's thinking, and that's the kind of thing that it comes to you over a few years. You see other players do it, and it rubs off on you. And now your hope that when he does that's something that, Andy and Henry will hear about and maybe eventually see again in person and think about when they're in that same kind of position 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
Yeah, and I noticed, I can't remember if it was Brown or if it was Walk during yesterday's game was kind of praising Hedges for when Rich Hill was like laboring a little bit, because not only did you have the rain delay, but then he was up, plus, a lot of pitches again. And, you can't use as many mound visits, but he gave him like, I'm going to go out and use one of these mound visits to give my man like, a good 20, 30 seconds to kind of gather himself and get it together, and ended up, didn't get the quality start, but didn't have a bad start either.
Yeah, I asked both those guys about that. I had actually a pretty good chat yesterday with Austin, and I'm like, well, how do you approach pitchers are so different, dude, and they react differently, and some guys you need to kick them in the butt a little bit, and some guys you got to rub their back and massage your shoulders a little bit. How do you know that? And he goes, well, you never, it's. You have a general idea with different pitchers what works for them in different ways, but a lot of times it just depends on the circumstances. And there'll be times with Rich, when he's in full Dick Mountain mode and the F-bombs are flying, and he says you don't need to light a fire under him then. You just need to maybe go out if you see something and just, like he mentioned, like the curveball was starting on the plate. So when he would release it, so it would have so much movement that it would end up in his mitt well off of the plate. So he says, just a little thing like that, just tweak your release point a little bit for the curve, and or even just to crack a little joke or something, just to kind of like get a guy back into the game in a circumstance. Just the value of having a guy that has worked with so many different kind of personalities and knows when you need to stroke a guy's fire or when a guy's fire is already burning bright, and you just need to kind of like readjust his focus.
Yeah, and that veteran leadership is definitely needed within this clubhouse, and it's been great for the team. And Rob, it's been great to talk to you again. These conversations could go an hour to 2 hours if I had the time, and if you had the time. I mean, because it just the time flies by. But anybody that doesn't, you have to go follow Rob on Twitter, and he makes it easy for us, and it's just at Rob Biertempfel. Read all of his articles on The Athletic. Like I said, Rob, this was a great time. Can't wait to do it again sometime, brother.
No problem, man. Anytime. Give me a buzz.